I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. This is the fifth and final analysis of the Knox email. It's taken 5 episodes to get through the whole thing, and this last one is a long one. It kicks off with another controversy: who called 911 or the equivalent in Italy? Did you know the police who arrived at the scene were there because someone else called the police, someone who had found Meredith's phone in their garden and reported it missing? The police identified the phone as Meredith's and her home as Villa della Pergola 7, and that's why they were there. That's how the police arrived at the scene. And guess what? They were right to investigate because serious foul play was and had been underway. In short, the cops who arrived on the scene and who first discovered Meredith murdered weren't even called to the scene by Knox or Solicitor, even though they will tell you they called the police. Knox's email, this section of it, starts off: there are 2 types of cops in Italy: carabinieri, local cops dealing with traffic and domestic calls, and the police investigators. He first called his sister for advice, then called the carabinieri. I then called Filomena, who said she would be on her way home immediately. While we were waiting, 2 ununiformed police investigators came to our house. Now, why do we need to be told the investigators are ununiformed? Again, notice the incredible level of detail in this email compared to Knox's fuzzy, foggy, 4-page selective amnesia note a day or 2 later. She goes on to write, I showed them what I could and told them what I knew, gave them phone numbers and explained a bit in broken Italian. And then Filomena arrived with her boyfriend Marco and 2 other friends of hers. All together, we checked the house out, talked to the police, and then the spot's not really clear. And in a big, I don't know if it should be in a bit, they all opened Meredith's door. I was in the kitchen standing aside, having really done my part for the situation. So I find it really interesting that everyone is kind of standing outside Meredith's door, but Amanda and Raffaele are somewhere else when the door's about to be opened. You know, this is supposed to be Amanda's friend. And although in her email she says she was in the kitchen, in her testimony she said something else. She said she was asked, did you get a glimpse by the prosecutor? She said no. Then she's asked, where were you? And then she said, I was near the entrance in the living room. So you even have an inconsistency there. Before we get to the rest of this analysis, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're enjoying this analysis, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button. This is the 5th and final chance to do so if you've been following this analysis. And let's get started. So she goes on to write, when they opened Meredith's door, I heard Filomena scream, a foot, a foot. So Filomena is standing at the door. She wants to know that Meredith is okay. She's concerned. She's there. Why is Filomena there and Amanda's not? And then she says, I immediately tried to get to Meredith's room, but Raffaele grabbed me and took me out of the house. The police told everyone to get out. So Knox basically explains that she didn't know what was in the room, couldn't see what was in the room, and like everybody else seems to know, but she doesn't know. And the reason that she leaves is because the police told them to. And Alec Baldwin told the same story, that he just left the church because they were ordered out. Then she writes, and not long afterward, the Carabinieri arrived, and then soon afterward, more police investigators. And that's always made me wonder, did they actually call the police kind of secretly when they saw the police arriving? Because it would be like, why didn't you call the police? I've always wondered about that. Now, compare the speed at which the cops arrived on the scene, opened the door and found Meredith, to Knox taking all morning, several hours, to even figure out something was wrong, beyond it being quote-unquote odd and quote-unquote strange. And that was between taking showers and carrying around a mop and dirty clothes. She goes on to write, they took all of our information and asked us the same questions over and over. At the time, I had only what I was wearing and she writes badge, but I think she means bag, which thankfully had my passport in it and my wallet. Yes, and they found Knox carrying quite a lot of cash, theoretically a month's rent minus, let's say the cost of cleaning products, a cup of coffee and sundries. She writes, no jacket though, and I was freezing. After sticking around at the house for a bit, the police told us to go to the station to give testimony, which I did. Knox is right that it was freezing, which makes her statement about taking a second shower kind of unlikely. And what's more, I don't know if you remember, she wrote that she took her clothes off in her room and then walked to the bathroom in an ice-cold house. How likely do you think that is? It's also interesting that Knox doesn't seem to have any clothing. Had she run out of clean clothes? If so, how did that happen? She writes, I was in a room for 6 hours straight after that without seeing anyone else, answering questions in Italian in the first hour, and then they brought in an interpreter and he helped me out with the details that I didn't know the words for. Now, if you think about it in the confines of her story, she doesn't seem to have any concern for Meredith in her own story. She doesn't seem to ask anyone what happened to Meredith. She doesn't seem to express any sadness or concern or shock. She doesn't seem to express any, how can I put it, in terms of letting her family know. In other words, trying to take responsibility for, letting people close to Meredith know what had happened on behalf of Meredith. Instead, she's worrying because she feels cold. She's kind of worried about herself. She has to sit in a room for 6 hours. That's what she's thinking about. And the other side of that is sitting for 6 hours straight after a murder investigation. How long would you expect to sit somewhere if someone was murdered in your house and the police wanted to find out what happened and spoke to you? How long do you think you would expect the police to pay attention to it and want answers? Would you want them to talk to you for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, or what would be the appropriate amount of time? And if there was a lot of blood as well, what would you want to know? Then she goes on to say, they asked me, of course, about the morning and the last time I saw her, because I was the closest to her. Questions about her habits and her relationships. Now, that's really important to emphasize, Knox acknowledging I was the closest to her. I think that's true in quite a few respects. She was the closest to her in the villa. Out of everyone in that entire villa, upstairs and downstairs, Knox's door was the closest to her door. Out of everyone who stayed in that villa over those few days, well, she was also the closest to her because no one else was there. And then I also think it's quite misleading because they weren't actually getting along towards the end. So she should have been the closest to her, but was she? Then Knox doesn't say here that Meredith's boyfriend was the boy downstairs. So in other words, she says that she was questioned about Meredith's habits and Meredith's relationships. Knox doesn't mention here that her boyfriend was the boy downstairs, Giacomo. And Giacomo, in an article, apparently said that he suspected Amanda. So you even have Meredith's boyfriend, who also lived in the house, believing that Amanda was a likely suspect, certainly at the time of the interview. The interview said Amanda has also acknowledged that she got on well with Giacomo, had music and a love of the Beatles in common, and probably liked him. And as far as I remember, Giacomo gave her a hug when he arrived at the police station. She goes on to write, afterward, when they were taking my fingerprints, I met two of Meredith's English friends, two girls she goes out with, including the last one who saw her alive that night, the night she was murdered. They also had their prints taken. Now, think about just the words that she's using there, that the police wanted to get the fingerprints of one of Meredith's friends, including the last one who saw her alive the night she was murdered. Is it really necessary to say the night she was murdered? I mean, it's the last who saw her alive. That's it. And so don't you think she's casting some shade there? Anyway, after that, this is around 9 at night by this time, I was taken into the waiting room where there were various other people who I all knew from various places, who all knew Meredith. It's really not very well expressed. She's certainly not the writer, I guess, that she is today, or the journalist that she is today. At this point, she writes, her friends from England, my roommates, even the owner of the pub she most frequented, basically were questioned. And by the way, that's not Patrick Lumumba. Meredith didn't go to Le Chic, so the owner of the pub that they're referring to must be the owner of another pub. Do you notice that Patrick isn't even mentioned in this very long, very detailed version of events, and yet he's the central character in the note written from prison, basically that confession, which is under trial now for, was that slander or not? Given just how much we've dealt with so far, what do you think the answer is to that? She goes on to write, after a while, my neighbors were taken in too, having just arrived home from a week-long vacation in their hometown, which explained why they weren't home when I banged on the door. Oh, so you didn't know they were away on holiday? Oh, they didn't tell you. Right. Now, the other thing with the neighbors and, even Knox's own housemates not being at home for a certain period of time, you can kind of imagine that them not being home, what might you get up to when the people in your house just aren't around? What might you do differently? If you're a student in a student town in a foreign country, what might you do if the locals go away and they leave the place? You sort of have the run of the house. Might you get up to some mischief over a weekend? Might you throw a party? Might you bring someone home that you might all of those things. She writes also, later than that, another guy showed up and was taken in for questioning, a guy I don't like, but who both Meredith and I knew from different occasions, a Moroccan guy that I only know by his nickname amongst the girls, Shaky. Again, a not too subtle hint. Maybe he's the murderer. Can you see how it appears to be a precedent in this note, this idea of trying to suggest someone else might be involved? And it kind of feels like this is the second time she sort of does that, doesn't it? Then she writes, then I sat around in this waiting room without having a chance to leave or eat anything besides vending machine food, which gave me a hell of a stomachache. So again, she's worried about herself, concerned about her own discomfort. Until 5:30 in the morning. During this time, I received calls from a lot of different people, family mostly, of course, and I also talked with the rest, especially to find out what exactly was in Meredith's room when they opened it. Now, there is actually something very important we need to talk about that was found in Meredith's room under her bed. Any idea what it is? If you want me to continue this analysis, but just looking at some aspects of the crime scene, let me know, and we'll do so in a next episode. Then Knox writes, apparently her body was laying under a sheet and with her foot sticking out, and there was a lot of blood. Whoever had did this had slit her throat. They told me to be back at 11 a.m. I went to Rafaela's place and ate something substantial and passed out. By the way, she didn't have her throat slit. A knife was plunged into her throat. It wasn't as though someone pulled it to the side. It was plunged into her throat. And there were actually two plunge marks, one on the one side, one on the other side. Now, the other thing to think about is it's 11 a.m. and Knox says she needed to pass out. Why is Knox so tired? If she'd slept until 10:30 a.m. the previous day, as she claimed, she shouldn't be tired. And think about it, students are world famous for staying out late and for a record amount of hours. So why is she so tired at 11 a.m.? Oh, hang on. She says, they told me to be back at 11 a.m. I'm not quite sure what the time is when she goes home, but the point remains, why is she so tired? In the morning, Raffaele drove me back to the police station, but had to leave me when they said they wanted to take me back to the house for questioning. Then she writes, before I go on, I'd like to say that I was strictly told not to speak about this, but I'm speaking with you people who are not involved and who can't do anything bad except talk to journalists, which I hope you won't do. So she kind of throws it out there, puts it out there, suggests it, and then says, oh, well, I hope you don't do that. And I think this gives you an insight into the type of person Knox is, certainly in my opinion. Do you think she's writing this email so no one will talk to the media, or so that they will? And by saying, I don't want you to talk to the media, she's kind of getting herself off the hook in the event that they do. You know, if the police say, how did this happen? Well, I sent them an email, but I specifically told them not to talk to journalists. It's not my fault if they did. Quite clever, wouldn't you say? Then she says, I have to get this off my chest because it's pressing down on me, and it helps to know that someone besides me knows something, and that I'm not the one who knows the most out of everyone at the house. And so you kind of get the idea that that has come up, that the people around her expect her to know more than that what she does. And the fact that her room is next to Meredith's, the fact that Meredith was a English-speaking expat and Amanda's an English-speaking expat, and that they were apparently friends. What can you tell us about Meredith? They are thinking you should be the one who knows the most out of everyone. And she seems to be saying, no, I don't know the most out of everything. I don't really know very much. And then she says, also about the personalities of our neighbors. How well did I know them? Pretty well. We are friends. Was Meredith sexually active? Yeah, she borrowed a few of my condoms. Does she like anal? What the if? I don't know. Does she use Vaseline? Now, it's interesting how Amanda puts Meredith's sexuality on trial just a few hours after her murder. She puts Meredith's sexuality on trial. She makes specific reference to certain things. Is it really necessary to say, does she like anal in this email? Because if you think about it, it was really Knox's sexuality that would be questioned, and she would get that nickname Foxy Knoxy. You know, Foxy Knoxy would be the way that the media would refer to her, with her sexuality being a really big part of that. Quite ironic, isn't it? Then she writes for her lips. So Vaseline was obviously found in the scene. And then she's asked, what kind of person is Stefano? Nice guy, has a really pretty girlfriend. Very interesting. We'd like to, she writes, how you something, but probably means show you something and tell us if this is out of normal. They took me into the neighbor's house. They had broken the door to open to get in, but they told me to ignore that. The rooms were all open. So that's another detail she mentions, is that the door downstairs was broken open, and she's almost suggesting that, well, isn't that important that there'd been a break-in downstairs? But I think there's actually a video of the officer literally kicking the door in. So she goes on to say, Giacomo and Marco's room was spotless, which made sense, I guess she means. It's really badly written, this, because the guys, she writes, because without an E. The guys had thoroughly cleaned the whole house before they left on vacation. Stefano's room, however, well, his bed was stripped of linens, which was odd, and the comforter he used was shoved up at the top of his bed with blood on it. Now this is quite important. She writes, I obviously told them that the blood was definitely out of normal, and also that he usually had his bed made. They took note of it and ushered me out. She writes, ushered, USSRED. Now, what's also, she spells definitely DEFINATLEY. I mean, that is such a twisted way of writing, definitely. It's quite interesting what Knox became, a reporter essentially, a journalist, and wrote a book. When you look at this note, you almost wonder how that happened. But the point is, she makes a really big deal about the blood downstairs when she made such a small deal of the blood upstairs. She's also convinced that it's a big red flag, but it turned out it was actually a cat that had cut its paw. So it was a false alarm. Meanwhile, as I said, the blood in her own bathroom is completely normal, except that right next door is a bloodbath, and we know now that it was not normal whatsoever. Another thing that's important to note is even that bloody footprint is somewhat diffuse. You get the feeling that someone had stepped in water, or that water had gone over. She even said, Knox said, that she stepped on the mat after taking a shower, which suggests maybe an effort was made to get rid of the blood on the mat, right? And other traces of blood that are there look kind of pinkish. And when you look at the evidence in the Michelle Troconis trial, you see what blood looks like when someone has tried to clean it with water. It's got a translucent appearance. It's kind of pinky rather than brown or black. Then she writes, when I left the house to go back to the police station, they told me to put my jacket over my head and duck down the window so the reporters wouldn't try to talk to me. At the station, I just had to repeat the answers that I'd given at the house so they could type them up. Instead of writing so, she spells it D-O. And after a good 5.5 hour day with the police again, Raffaele picked me up and took me out for some well-deserved pizza. Again, she's kind of talking about what she wants. I'm getting some well-deserved pizza in the middle of my friend being murdered. I was starving. I was freezing. I then bought some underwear because, as it turns out, I won't be able to leave Italy for a while, as well as enter my house. I only had the clothes I was wearing the day it began. She writes, began B-A-G-A-N. So I bought some underwear and borrowed, spelled B-O-R-R-W-E-D, a pair of pants from Raffaele. She even spells his name wrong. Spoke with my remaining roommates last night, and it was a hurricane of emotions and stress, but we needed it anyway. What we have been discussing is basically what to do next. We are trying to keep our heads on straight. First things first, though. My roommates both work for lawyers, and they are going to try to send a request through on Monday to retrieve important documents of ours that are still in the house. Secondly, we are going to talk to the agency that we used to find our house and obviously request to move out. It kind of sucks that we have to pay the next month's rent, but the owner has protection within the contract. Now, what's quite interesting is in her own sort of recollection of talking with her roommates, she doesn't have any, there's no discussion about who they think killed Meredith. There's no discussion about contacting Meredith's family. There's no discussion about Meredith whatsoever. It's all about the formalities of dealing with admin and documentation. It's all very cold and clinical. It's all about dealing with the rental contracts. you would imagine in a situation like that the first thing they would do when they came together is speculate about the evidence and who killed Meredith and why, and was it anyone that they knew, and what do they think, and what did the police ask them. Instead, it's just, according to Knox, about the rental contract. And I also think that this actually feels like Knox expressing her genuine feelings about losing money. She's saying it sucks that we have to pay the next month's rent. So she's not very happy about losing money. That's the thing that sucks the most, not that Meredith was murdered. Knox's finances are also an important part of the narrative, as are her phone records. So we actually do have access to them. We can see how she was making very large withdrawals quite frequently. What is that all about? And then I think relatives were sending her money as well, and she still didn't seem to have very much money. So what was going on there? But anyway, we're not going to go into that here. She writes, after that, I guess I'll go back to class on Monday, although I'm not sure what I'm going to do about people asking me questions, because I really don't want to talk again about what happened. Why would you not want to talk about what happened if it's a simple story of, well, I wasn't there, right? I wasn't there and I don't know what happened. Why would you not want to talk about it? Wouldn't it really be the other thing that you would want to talk about? And if you think about it, Knox has been talking about it ever since. She wrote a book about it. She's got a podcast today about it. Then she says, I've been talking an awful lot lately and I'm pretty tired of it. After that, it's like I'm trying to remember what I was doing before all this happened. I still need to figure out who I need to talk to and what I need to do to continue studying in Perugia, because it's what I want to do. Anyway, that's the update. Feeling okay. Hope you all are well, Amanda. So think about that. After everything, Knox wants to continue studying as if nothing happened. Meanwhile, all of Meredith's friends, without exception, left Perugia because they didn't feel safe. How did Knox know that she would be safe with the murderer still on the loose? Why does Knox want to stay somewhere where she had this narrow, close call, almost being murdered herself? So I find that certainly very interesting. It's also interesting she didn't want to talk about what happened, but today, if she talks about what happened, she makes money out of it, and so she seems to be happy to talk about it. Anyway, I'm not going to take it further than that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.